No, I'm not just going to demake Magicka for the Nintendo 64. It's going to have its own unique world, its own characters, and its own unique magic system. I hadn't even heard of Magicka when I started this project. My magic system is kind of converging on what they did, but there are some unique features that I think will make it really stand out. The prototype you're seeing on the screen right now is what I built using the Oculus in Unity game engine. This idea started years ago. I wanted to make the project for VR. The magic system required you to draw symbols in the air, which sounded really cool, but it kind of became cumbersome. And then the 3D positions of the symbols mattered in relation to each other. You had to point symbols at each other. If you understood the magic system, it was kind of cool, but it just felt really complicated, and even doing simple things just took a long time. While I had plans to make it so you could create spells and then save them so you could cast quickly, it became clear that this needed to be much simpler. I shelved the idea, and shortly after that got into N64 development. After a few years of doing different games, I wanted to make my own unique game, and I decided to resurrect the magic idea and do it on the N64. But there were a few things I wanted to simplify. First of all, the 3D space and drawing symbols was just not really fun, and so I scrapped that and decided to just make the spell magic system based on writing out symbols in the correct order. But I realized that even simplifying it down to a written language instead of 3D space, there were just too many symbols that I had. I decided to condense it down to the most essential symbols. You have fire, air, ice, earth, and life. So I went with ice instead of water, which you would expect water, right? You have like the 4 elements. I've never felt like water is a super engaging mechanic. You have it in Tears of the Kingdom. The most it lets you do is drop it on lava to create walkable platforms and put out torches and clean up sludge. I might be forgetting other things, but none of those things really feel worthwhile to me to have a symbol around. And I could still do a couple of those with ice. Ice can still put out torches. Ice can still create platforms on water, and I could also use ice to do things like freeze enemies. I felt like ice had more going for it, and I wouldn't have to have some sort of separate water particle simulation. The ice spells could look like fire spells, but just with an ice texture instead. Now, the magic system has some interesting aspects to it, but before I talk about that, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is an excellent platform for learning. You can learn things about programming, math, science. There's really a lot of great content at a lot of levels. If you're wanting to get started making games, programming is a great skill to have, and Brilliant has you covered there. There are programming lessons on Python, or just learning how to think in code generally. That can get you started into a field where it's hard to know where to start. Brilliant helps you learn by actually doing, which I very much believe in. Just having a bunch of words read to you, or even just watching videos, it's just not quite the same as trying things out yourself. It forces you to internalize that more by doing. And the information is presented in little bite-sized chunks that you can take at your own pace. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/JamesLambert or click on the link in the description. You also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. So thanks again to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. One way that I have my runes doing extra work is each rune can be used either as a way to channel its energy into another rune, or to be the one that releases the energy. Basically, it matters which order you put the runes in. For example, you have wind and fire. Wind by itself acts on the player and causes them to run fast. And fire lets you shoot fire. If you combine the two, it does something different, but the order matters. If you do wind-fire, well, that is going to take the power of the wind and imbue it into fire, but because fire is the terminal symbol, or the symbol at the end, it is what manifests its energy, so what you get is a longer column of fire. So that's wind-fire, so what's fire-wind? Well, because wind makes the player run faster, I figured, well, fire-wind would just kind of leave a fire trail behind the player, but I wanted to make it just a little more interesting than just, and it leaves a fire trail. I also want to do the spell so you move much faster, but you move a fixed distance. So it turns the run fast spell that you can run indefinitely into a short dodge spell that you can do in short hops in all directions. And so every spell interacts with each other spell in its own unique way. Earth works a little bit differently. So one thing about the spell system that I wanted to make is I wanted it to be event-based. I wanted it to be kind of like your making spells using a programming language. The earth spell actually triggers effects after the rock impacts. For example, if you do air earth, that creates a projectile because the air will push the earth and it flies through the air, and there you go, you can throw rocks at things and it does damage. But if you put fire after the earth, that is a fireball. And when it hits its target, it will explode in fire. Earth always operates as a Terminator spell, so it will always manifest as earth. But when it hits something, it will then continue the spell along and chain into whatever's next. But I also wanted to have the way that the dash spell worked, where you can do fire dash or fire air, and it modifies the way it works. Well, I wanted that to work with projectiles too. So if you do air, fire, earth, you're going to imbue fire and air into that projectile. So that is actually going to create a projectile that instead of flying through the air like a rock would, it goes in the straight line like a rocket. So you could hit further off targets. I actually expect there to be some pretty overpowered spells you can make. And so long as they're difficult or require some thought to build, I'm okay with that. I want the player to feel powerful, and I want to reward creativity in understanding the magic system. So that's kind of how the magic system would work together. And if I go through every symbol one by one, you have fire, when imbued into other elements, makes it bursty, but on its own just emits flame. Ice is very similar, except emitting ice. Wind will push things, so you could use that for increasing the speed of the player. You can move enemies or push blocks. Earth you can use as a projectile, or if you don't push it with wind, it's just a shield. If you have the shield up and something hits you, it will actually be able to trigger an effect. But I'm thinking I'll make that only trigger effect if you just barely put the shield up. So that way it operates like a parry. And the last one is life, which by default will just heal the target. So you can just use life on its own to heal the player. But you could also use it as a chain into another spell to turn it into an auto target. So you imbue life into the rock. It seeks out a target. What are the philosophical implications of generating living rocks? Are they sentient? I don't know. There's definitely the possibility that I'm going to be adding other symbols, but I do want to keep it minimal. There actually is a sixth symbol that I already have. I'm calling it recast, but it's not elemental. All it does is let you delay the effect of the rest of the spell. So if you started a spell with a recast, you would cast once, and you could actually mash A to charge up the power of the spell before you push the button again to trigger the recast and then continue the spell. And it'd actually do it with more power because you charged it up. Or if you shot a projectile and it hits something, you could delay the fire effect. I'm imagining a puzzle where you have like a spinning object and you shoot a projectile and it latches on to the side, and then the spin goes around until there's a torch on the other side, and that's when you push A for the recast and it finally releases the fire to light the torch. There's also a few ideas I have that I don't want to give away spoilers for, because I want people who are playing the game to feel like they've discovered interesting things with trying out different combinations. My goal is to keep this simple enough that you don't feel overwhelmed when you're jumping in, and that most players can feel like they explore the magic system while still having enough complexity and interesting things that people who really want to dive in deep can create some really interesting stuff. That is the basic gist of the magic system. Because I'm making it for the N64, I'm really hoping to capture the 90s vibe in this, to make it feel like an N64 game that you played from your childhood, while hopefully modernizing a few things. Part of this magic system, because I want projectiles to be able to travel super fast, or to have the player be able to dash fast without tunneling through walls, I've had to really design the physics engine around those requirements. If you'd like to see a video on that, be sure to subscribe. I've also built out a scripting language, which might have been overkill, but you know what? I wanted to make a scripting language. It sounded fun. And I managed to make something that I think solves my needs and is quite simple. If you're interested in seeing a video about that, be sure to subscribe as well. I'm still working on the game, but I do want to give these regular updates explaining how progress is going. It will be a while before the game's out, because I've really taken on a big ambitious project, but I'm really excited to see where this project goes. Thank you to the Patreon supporters that are on the screen right now somewhere. Thanks again to Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and until next time, take care.